What if the most powerful country in the world is not the one with the strongest military, but the one that controls what everyone else needs to survive? Because right now, something is changing, and almost no one is paying attention. For decades, global power followed a simple logic. The strongest countries controlled trade, controlled energy, controlled the rules, and everyone else adapted. This was the era of globalization, a system built on one central idea: efficiency above everything else. Produce where it's cheapest, manufacture at scale, ship across the planet. It worked. It made goods cheaper, markets bigger, supply chains faster, but it also made something else invisible: dependence. Because this system only works if everything keeps working, if borders stay open, if supply chains remain intact, if no one decides to stop. And then, for the first time in decades, countries did stop, not because of war, but because of a virus. During COVID, the global economy didn't collapse all at once. It fractured. Factories shut down. Flights were grounded. Ports slowed to a crawl. And suddenly, things that had always been available weren't anymore. Hospitals ran out of protective equipment. Masks disappeared. Oxygen supplies became unstable in some regions. Ventilators were scarce, not because the world couldn't produce them, but because the system couldn't deliver them. Countries began restricting exports, keeping critical goods inside their borders, trying to secure their own populations first. Global trade didn't disappear, but trust in it did. Because for the first time, modern economies were forced to confront a simple question: what happens when everyone needs the same thing at the same time? And the answer was uncomfortable. Globalization works until it doesn't. Then came something even more destabilizing: the war in Ukraine. This time, it wasn't medical supplies, it was food. Ukraine and Russia are among the most important suppliers of grain and fertilizers to the world. When that flow was disrupted, the consequences were immediate. Food prices surged, supply chains tightened. Entire regions, especially in Africa and the Middle East, felt the pressure. And once again, countries began to ask a different question. Not who is the cheapest supplier, but who will still supply us when the system is under stress. This is where the shift begins, because what changed wasn't just prices, it was priorities. For decades, economic logic was simple: optimize for efficiency. Now, the logic is changing. Security matters, resilience matters, reliability matters. The cheapest supplier is no longer the safest one. And in a world defined by uncertainty, safety becomes power. This is why globalization isn't disappearing, but it is fragmenting. Instead of one interconnected system, we are seeing the emergence of multiple strategic networks. Countries are building relationships, not just based on price, but on trust, on alignment, on long-term security. And in this new landscape, some countries become far more important than anyone expected. Brazil is one of them, not because of military strength, not because of global dominance, but because of something much more fundamental. It can feed the world. Brazil is world's largest food exporter, the main source of commodities like soybeans, beef, corn, and other agricultural products. It has vast arable land, abundant fresh water, a climate that allows continuous production. But its real advantage is not just what it produces, it's how it fits into the system. Brazil is not a global enforcer. It doesn't impose ideological conditions. It doesn't operate as a geopolitical bloc leader. It trades, And that makes it something increasingly rare, a supplier that almost everyone can work with. The United States, China, Middle Eastern economies, African nations. In a fragmented world, that neutrality becomes an asset, because supply is no longer just economic, it is strategic. If countries depend on you for something essential, you matter. In negotiations, in crises, in alliances, this is where agriculture becomes power, and where Brazil's position begins to change. But there are different ways to turn economic strength into influence. The United States has traditionally done this through financial systems, institutions like the International Monetary Fund, loans, support, access to capital, but often with conditions attached, imposing policy adjustments, economic reforms, political alignment. China took a different approach. Instead of imposing, it invested. Infrastructure, ports, railways, energy systems, not just trade, but physical networks. It created relationships that are harder to break because they are built into the structure of other economies. Two different models, one based on rules and conditions, the other on integration and dependency. Brazil does not fully follow either model, but it has the potential to develop its own, not just exporting food, but building long-term supply agreements, investing in logistics, strengthening agricultural partnerships, turning production into influence. And this becomes even more relevant when you look at the BRICS, because BRICS is not a traditional alliance. It brings together countries with very different systems, different interests, different visions of global order. China, Russia, India, and others increasingly aligned outside Western structures. But Brazil is different. Culturally, historically, institutionally, it is closer to the West, and yet it engages deeply with the global South. That dual position creates something rare. Flexibility. Brazil can operate across multiple systems, as a partner to different blocs, as a bridge in a fragmented world. And in geopolitics, bridges have value because they connect systems that would otherwise remain separate. And connection is influence. This is why the shift we are seeing is not just economic, it is structural. Power is no longer defined only by military capacity, financial dominance, or technological leadership. It is also defined by something less visible: control over systems, logistics, supply chains, essential goods, the ability to provide stability in an unstable world. And countries that can do that become indispensable. Not always the loudest, not always the most dominant, but the most necessary. And in that world, Brazil is no longer just a participant. It becomes central, not because it seeks power, but because the system is beginning to depend on it. And the question is no longer whether this shift is happening, it's who understands it first. Because this is not the only transformation underway. There are other shifts happening in parallel, faster, more volatile, less visible, and the countries that recognize them early will shape what comes next, and almost no one is paying attention. If you want more stories like this, underreported shifts in military and geopolitical power that the mainstream press ignores, subscribe to Brazil Lens. I cover the world through a Brazilian perspective. The stories that don't make the front page but probably should.